Hi, it's Gabby and welcome to the Happier Life Project, brought to you by the free, award-winning mental health and wellness app, My Possible Self. We're in the midst of a mini-series exploring romantic relationships and mental health. And today's episode is a juicy one. Sex, one of life's great pleasures, can also be the source of some of life's greatest grievances. When we start to explore the connection between sex and mental health, so many factors come into play. Enjoyable sex, including self-pleasure, has been shown to ease stress, depression, and anxiety. But on the flip side, painful or unenjoyable sex can increase those very same struggles. Even not having sex can be a contributing factor to stress, depression, and anxiety. There's really no reason to feel embarrassed about having or talking about sex. It's a perfectly natural physical act. And yet, shame, stigma, embarrassment, performance anxiety, sexuality, preferences, kinks, fears, all these things can negatively impact on mental well-being. Which is ironic, considering sex can be so beneficial for our mental health. So if we could squash the shame, get to the root of any fear we might be having, and learn to communicate more openly and confidently with our partners about it, we'd be well on our way to enjoying a happier, healthier life. Today's guest is Kate Moyle, a psychosexual and relationship therapist and an EFS and ESSM certified psychosexologist, which basically means she's an expert in the study of human sexual behaviour. Kate's also the host of the Sexual Wellness Sessions podcast, is a regular media contributor on all things sex, relationships and well-being, and she's the author of The Science of Sex, a book that promises to answer every question you've ever had about your sex life. Unfortunately, when I sat down to interview Kate, this was before the book had been published, so I can't verify that statement personally. You'll have to read the book and check it out for yourself. What I love about Kate Moyle is how frank, honest, and normal she makes the conversation around sex feel, which is exactly how it should feel. But for many of us, it's still a bit of a struggle. In this conversation, we unpack why and how sex can support our mental and emotional health. And just as importantly, when it becomes the crux of major distress. We go there, we look at the pros of self-pleasure, the uncomplicated truth about a woman's sexuality, sex with your ex, and friends with benefits, what that does for your headspace, and why Kate would love us to ditch the word performance when it comes to sex altogether. This one's really good, guys. Take notes. Ready to find a healthier, happier you? Let's get started. I am very honest. Let's start that again. I am very honest. But I'm very honoured to be talking today to a world-leading sex therapist and host of the Sexual Wellness Sessions podcast. Welcome, Kate Moyle, to the Happier Life Project.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Quick recap about you. You're an accredited psychosexual and relationship therapist who specialises in working with those who are struggling with difficulties with their sex lives and sexuality, including many in their 20s and their 30s, and that's a lot of our demographic for sure within the app, who are impacted by the stresses of modern life. So you help to get people to a place of sexual health, happiness and well-being. So in terms of like sexual health and starting off there, and how it affects our well-being, I thought this would be quite a good place to start. Defining sexual health, well, how would you define it?
Yeah, I think traditionally we've always thought of sexual health as basically being STI infection free. That's how it's always kind of been considered. Whereas actually we know that it encompasses so much more than that, that it's about how we have sex, how we feel about sex, how we emotionally feel about sex, the sex we're physically having. And yes, looking after our physical sexual health is a part of that. And sexual health screenings are a part of that. But it's not about that doesn't just kind of encompass the entire thing. And a lot of colleagues and I have a really strong feeling against terms like the word clean to infer that someone who doesn't have an STI is clean, and therefore, by association, anyone that does is dirty. You know, this is an infection, something biological that can happen and happens to lots of people and shouldn't be labeled that way.
Yeah. So is it about feeling good, maybe, sexual health, or good sexual health is about feeling good about sex?
Yeah, I think it is. I think, you know, one of the biggest things that we all battle with in our sex lives is the association between sex and shame. And working through that is such a big thing. We live in a culture, a society where sex is confusing, still quite stigmatized, still quite taboo, definitely not in line with every other area of our health.
Yeah.
And as a psychosexual therapist, I work with sex from a biopsychosocial approach, which is biology, psychology, and social. So we understand that it's not just one of these things, but all of them and how they all relate to each other. And so to consider our relationship with sex, what our sexuality, and when I say that, I mean the role that sex plays in our lives, not just who we are attracted to, is how that sits in our lives is impacted by all of those different facets of what's going on, both within us, but also around us.
Yeah, I definitely have quite a bit to ask you about when it comes to like the shame factor surrounding sex. And it's ironic, really, because the world couldn't continue without sex, right? So we've got something a bit wrong there. But I thought it would be nice to start off with some positives about how a healthy sex life supports good mental health. So I just pulled 4 ways a healthy sex life supports good mental health online from a doctor in America. I'm happy to sort of jump in and start there, or if you want, you could just go for it, whichever you prefer.
Well, no, let's talk about the 4. I want to know what they say.
Okay, you want to know the 4. According to Dr. Dana McNeil in San Diego, she says 4 ways a healthy sex life supports good mental health is it boosts serotonin. So sex boosts serotonin, which helps improve your mood and fight off depression. Additionally, one of the hormones released during orgasm is serotonin, leaving you feeling soothed from stress and anxiety. Yeah, you're nodding in agreement?
Yeah, the hormone boosts that we can get, the neurochemical boosts that we can get from sex and from orgasm are feel good, you know, a feel good cocktail essentially. So oxytocin, which is released from skin on skin contact as a bonding hormone, we see that we can get it even if we're on our own, but is really boosted in partnered experiences. Dopamine, so the reward center in our brain that is responding to things that make us feel good and the anticipation of things that make us feel good. And then we also have other hormones that are released post-orgasm that give us that kind of snoozy, sleepy feeling. And we know that these also counteract cortisol, which is the stress hormone. But for lots of people who are struggling with their mental health, that sleep might be something that's affected. And so actually a kind of pre-bed, pre-sleep neurochemical boost of all of these things could actually help with that. But also pleasure makes us feel good. That's the definition of it.
You've just basically covered two more of the bullet points. She'd said leads to better sleep. She said it's common to fall asleep after sex because your body, like you said, releases a prolactin, a hormone that helps you feel rested and relaxed. And like you just mentioned, the orgasm also releases oxytocin, a hormone that promotes sleep. Since a lack of sleep can worsen a mental health disorder or increase your risk for developing one, sleep promotes a healthier, more refreshed you. And then, like you said about making you happy, she says the cuddling and physical intimacy of sex also gives a boost to your happiness. Endorphins are one of the many chemicals released in the brain during sex. Endorphins are the neurotransmitters associated with the feelings of happiness, causing your mood to brighten overall as it helps lift depression. Like you see in the movies when there's a spring in the step the morning after the night before. That's what that's about.
Yeah, it is, but also there's an element of, I think, here, which is that whenever we talk about sex, we assume we're talking about partnered experiences, and actually, people can get these benefits from solo pleasure, from self pleasure, from masturbation, and I think that it's an important thing to say because particularly when all these conversations around sex are around coupled people, a lot of the population are single and happy with being single. Some people are not happy with being single, but it doesn't exclude them from having all of these benefits.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah. Well, the last one was boost self-esteem. When you're having sex, the feelings of intimacy with your partner, as well as feeling nurtured and desired, boost your self-confidence and overall well-being. So that one, maybe you do need somebody with you.
Yes, but I think that also having an orgasm, building a positive relationship with our body, feeling good about ourselves, experiencing pleasure, giving ourselves pleasure, I think that those things can also contribute to that. Because if we're feeling good in ourselves, a lot of what we kind of put out into the world is how we feel about ourselves. And if we're in a good place and feeling good about ourselves, we might notice more of that reciprocated, or we feel in a better mind space because we feel in a good place and we're getting all of those boosts. And that can change how we, our perception of the world around us and what's happening. So I think that there's no wrong answer.
Yeah. I'm really interested, actually, just sort of piggybacking off that a little bit. Why is it that guys seem to be more open, comfortable about talking about self pleasure, but then with women and girls it's more awkward? Not to all, but that seems to be the case, right? That for a female, are we still kind of from generations past, it's just that sort of trickling effect that eventually will fizzle out in terms of like sex is for procreation only, it's pleasure for the guy, but it's like childbearing for the female. Is that what that's about, do you think?
I think that a lot of it historically has been about that, and a lot of the conversations historically have all been around reproduction. So basically the definition of sex is penis in vagina penetration, is intercourse. And we've seen this complete focus around that as the model of sex. Now, female pleasure has been left out of the conversation and education for a long time. So the structure of the clitoris has not even been a part of a lot of sexual education conversations. And lots of people having sex don't have both a penis and a vagina in their relationships. We have lots of same-sex couples. And none of this conversation includes people who are non-binary or trans. We don't see any conversations around people who feel that way in their bodies and feel that way about themselves and their identities. So it's very, very binary, this conversation about sex. And when we start to open it up and to focus it more on pleasure and fun, and I think that ties into what you're saying, we've celebrated certain aspects of sexuality historically, but not other parts, then we're starting to shift this conversation. And we've seen a huge leap in terms of, for example, sex toy sales. Sex toys are primarily targeted at women. And that market is enormous. And so it does feel like that gap is changing. But we're in quite an interesting time where we have this history meeting kind of historical hidden sexuality of history kind of being very shameful and taboo, or the right type of sex, inverted commas, versus modern life where we can watch sex on Netflix and things like perfume adverts are really sexualized, and we're kind of at a bit of a clash where we're old taboos, but the new attitudes and the new conversations. And I think the internet has massively changed that.
Yeah. I'm curious, just in your profession, do you know what the sex education at school is like now? Because when I was at school, it was, almost non-existent. And then it was, I think, more about trying to scare you off ever having sex.
It is better, and we see that consent and relationships is being included. There is definitely a shift happening. I think it's still not where it needs to be. But then we also see places, charities like the Eve Appeal are doing schemes where they're doing educational schemes with things like Know Your Body, where they're going in and doing educational resources and classes all about helping people to specifically identify body parts so that they can identify if they have a problem with those body parts. So it's all intended to help with cancer prevention. And those schemes have been really successful.
People often think about sex as something that happens in our bodies, but a lot of it is happening in our brains, right?
Yeah, the brain is the biggest sex organ in the body, for sure.
Really? Is that why we can be in our head so much, even though, you know, the body might be moving quite a lot? We're like really trapped in the head.
Absolutely. And I think that also, you know, our brain is the thing that can change how we're operating, can change our perspective. If we, for example, are finding sex highly anxiety provoking, we're not in a relaxed, aroused sexual state. We're actually in a fight or flight state. We're actually in the stress response. And that can interfere with sexual functioning. It can interfere with us being able to be present. It can interrupt our perception of our pleasure. And that is because our brain is responding to what it thinks or what we think is a stressful situation. And that is to do with how we feel in that context. And it's not our brain doing anything necessarily wrong, but because its job is to protect us, but it clashes when it comes to sex. And that's where a lot of people experience a lot of sexual difficulties.
And do you think that part of that as well is the build up to actually the physical? We're already in our heads before we've even started having sex. Maybe it's performance anxiety, or maybe it's like you're just not in the mood. You've not got the, if you were talking about between two people, one person's got a higher sex drive than the other. Like, I mean, there's, as you know, various ways and different ways we can be in our head, right?
Definitely. And I think that distraction is one of the biggest interrupters of both our desire and our arousal. Now, that distraction can come from our environment, from around us, or it can come from our thoughts. It can come from how we're feeling. And the model that a lot of us use in psychosexual therapy and sexology is something called the dual control model. And in a nutshell, you know, we're operating on a system where we have a brake and an accelerator. And when it comes to sex, it's the things that we have to come off the brake as we push on the accelerator. But there are things that are going to push both of those things for us. But as humans, we all have a different level of sensitivity. So someone who is very easily sexually aroused and doesn't feel very sexually inhibited, feels like they are very interested in sex and have sex a lot, they've probably got a very sensitive accelerator and not a very sensitive brake. So it's very easy to feel turned on. Whereas someone who really struggles to focus on sex, get in the mood, to find things that turn them on, might have a really sensitive brake. And so we understand how this kind of system of inhibition and excitation in us is also playing a big part. And when we think about sex, it makes a lot of sense because we might be in a context where something feels sexy, we're kissing our partners, but the context is inappropriate. We're out in public, so it wouldn't be an appropriate place to have sex. And so then that shuts it down. Or it also explains why people can have something called arousal non-concordance, which is essentially when the mind and the body don't line up. So we might be feeling physically sexually turned on, but mentally not be there.
Wow, it's so complex, isn't it? Just thinking about something I saw you say in an interview. Yeah, it's more common for couples to not be perfectly sexually matched than perfectly sexually matched. And I thought, my gosh, wow, if like more people knew this, it might relieve a lot of anxiety that it's kind of, because all we see is, especially on TV and movies, is the mind-blowing sex scenes. And as you know yourself, it's kind of like living up to that and feeling like there's something wrong with us if we don't.
I think that so many of us also compare our sex lives to those kind of scenes that we've seen because we have very little exposure to sex apart from those moments, and they're obviously all curated, acted, filmed. But I think that we don't expect to be perfectly sexually matched in every other area of our lives. We don't expect our partner to like exactly the same foods that we do, or have for us to, every time we go out for dinner, order exactly the same thing, and exactly, we don't sleep at exactly the same time, exercise at the same time. We don't have exactly the same interests, exactly the same jobs. But we think somehow that when it comes to sex, we need to be perfectly sexually matched, but whilst not asking any questions, whilst not exploring it, whilst not talking about it. So all these narratives are so counterintuitive, because we are taught that when it comes to sex, we shouldn't ask any questions. We should just know, we should be an expert, and our partner's an expert, without trial and error, understanding, a bit of clarification. So we should get it perfect from minute one. And then we should be perfectly sexually aligned, but without ever having a conversation about what it is that we both like about sex. We should do that by telepathy, essentially. And so when we break all this stuff down, we do realize that these barriers are very ingrained into our thinking about sex without us necessarily realizing that they're there, but they can create a real sense of sometimes that we're failing when it comes to sex when we're not, and also a real sense of that we're alone in our experiences. And that for me is something that I talk about being one of the biggest side effects of struggles with sex, is that we feel we're the only one, and therefore we kind of keep it to ourselves. That builds up negative feelings and shame and embarrassment, and that can really impact our mental health, because we feel there's something wrong with us, or that we're the problem, all of this kind of negative self-talk, when actually arguably most people will probably have, even if it's just once or a one-off, a struggle with sex in some way, shape, or form at some point in their lives. Some people a lot more than others. So why is that not the message that we are putting out into society? The conversation around sex lives have good days, bad days, average days, like everything else. And I think that when we do, it changes how we feel about sex in a big way.
Is it maybe because it's, whether we're on our own or with a partner, that it's something quite personal? Is that why we think we can't talk about it so much? Or again, is it more kind of from way back when, it's like you said, it's changing, but it's that we don't really talk about it, and it's maybe seen as something naughty to be talking about it?
I think a lot of those things. I think that it is, I think that the taboo of sex is really, really ingrained. And even now, if I'm talking to someone I don't know and they ask what I do for a job, there's always a response. And that's just a pretty basic example. But we don't have sexual health integrated into the rest of our wellness and our well-being like we do the other aspects of our health. And we are getting there slowly. And we are seeing that there's, a bigger market for sexual wellness growing and sexual well-being growing, but there's still a lot of censorship. For example, things like social media sites don't allow advertising of certain products which can help sexual well-being, particularly those that are targeted at women. We see that there are a lot of limitations, that people struggle to get investment, and there are still those barriers in place. And I think that there is a big shift, and the more it becomes normalized in society, particularly from a younger age, and we start to have conversations about these things from a younger age, the more also people will be able to talk peer to peer about it.
I think about, I'm in Rome at the moment, and I've spent quite a bit of time here this year. My first day that I landed here, I started walking around, and there were like vending machines where you'd usually get candy, because that's at first what I thought they were. But they were actually for like condoms, some kind of sex toys, but it was more about protection. But they were certainly in the centre of Rome. They were every couple of blocks, these vending machines that you could go in and get whatever you needed. And I was like, wow. And then spending more time here, they do seem to be more open about sex, or celebratory of sex, and perhaps England is a little bit behind in that respect, maybe from the Europeans.
I think it's mixed. I think the cities, there's more of a normalized sexual culture, particularly in like cities, and I think that's across the board. But I love the idea of condom vending machines in the street. I think it's great.
Yeah, breaking down these barriers, would you say at the heart of it is communication? Something else you did mention that I saw in an interview is like when we're talking about sex, the hardest person to talk to about sex is the person that you're having sex with, which is so true. But how can things change if you don't?
I think it is really true, because I think it ties back to what we were saying before, which is that we all think that we should have it worked out. And I think we all feel this idea of, if we admit to, even that word, admit, if we say, look, I don't feel like this is working as well as we like it to, or can we try something different, or why don't we talk about what we like, or what feels good for you, then in some way there seems to be an inference that we don't know what we're doing. And the inference is, if we don't know what we're doing with sex, that must be something really shameful or embarrassing about that. Whereas sex is different with every person that we have it with. We co-create sex, because every experience, a bit like every conversation we have with someone, is happening in that moment, in that context between those two people. And so it shouldn't be the same every time. And we should expect that. But that requires some kind of communication around it. But I think that we never see the conversations about sex happening. So when we talk about seeing sex kind of on screen, for example, we don't see that often represented. And so that also plays a part in leading us to think that it doesn't happen or shouldn't happen. But yeah, communication is a huge pillar of sexual wellness. And it's the one that I think people find the hardest. And I think it's the one that we don't really want to hear. It's not sexy. It doesn't feel exciting. It feels not necessarily boring, but actually it can be one of the sexiest things that we can do, because if we explore with people conversationally what they like, then we can all have a better time, a more satisfying time. When we're making assumptions, if we've been taught one model of sex and then we always act basing on the assumption that model of sex is applicable to every situation, it can't be. There isn't a one size fits all model. And so therefore we have to work it out as we go.
Do you think on the flip side as well, there's that kind of worry about like offending the partner, or if you are the partner and you're hearing it, then it's like the issues that could potentially create with, oh God, they're not enjoying it, I'm not performing well enough for them. I mean, it takes two to tango, right?
Yes, and that's why I say it's about co-creating. Even that word performing, like so many people feel they need to perform when it comes to sex. And I think we've become preoccupied with the idea of how we perform sexually, and actually that can take us away from pleasure, because the preoccupation with how we're doing takes us away from how we're feeling.
If we could go back to shame a little bit, there's so much shame in terms of like, have I had as much experience as the other? Like even shame not having sex because you're single or you just don't want it at the moment or for whatever reason. In terms of with alcohol, when things can become a bit blurry, maybe there's regret there because you've consented, but you were under the influence, like this whole thing of shame. Is this a lot of what you see within your clients when they come to you wanting to work through things?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that shame and sex are so intrinsically linked. And the way that we can start to manage that, deal with it, break away from it, work through it, is by working out how sex works for us as an individual. Because this one size fits all model that we're all trying to make work at the moment isn't working. And we know it's not working because of the numbers of people that are struggling with sex, and they're huge. And it's about us understanding, okay, what is it that's making me feel shame? Where did those messages come from? Because a lot of the time we've been given our messages and our narratives about sex from a generation before, who got theirs from a generation before, and so on. And so we get them kind of passed down, but they're also reinforced by things that we see in society, by visible and invisible messages. Those messages about sex and how to be, and they start early.
Yeah.
we pick them up very quickly. And also conversations, like when we say the word sex in front of an adult and they kind of pull back or get twitchy or pull a face, or that sense
Yeah.
that we shouldn't ask is
Yeah.
there from quite an early stage.
Yeah. And it can also be entwined with religion. I think about my gran, who was a really devout Catholic. She was like a second mum. We were so close. And I love her to pieces. But again, just I think a generational thing. Like neighbours, I remember being a kid and two people they were kissing and going to go into the bedroom, and she was like, turn that filth off. And that happened a lot, that it was like if anything was kind of romantic and might be leading to the bedroom, it was like turn the TV off straight away, and bleach your eyes. And I do remember having conversations with her as a kid where if you lived together and you weren't married, you were living in sin. I mean, I still get embarrassed going to buy condoms. I'm like, sort of, oh, maybe nobody see me, and that's still now so many years that I'm a fully grown woman, and I still kind of like I'm doing something wrong,
You can get them delivered on subscription now.
Well, I've got the vending machines at the moment. I'm all right.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I mean, we touched on it before about that upbringing. It does really, really impact how you view relationships and sex and performance as well, and all of that stuff. If you've kind of like been locked away from it.
Well, not even locked away from it. I work with a lot of people who say to me, God, I remember the first time that someone told me about sex. I was 10 and it was in the playground at school and it sounded terrifying. And I held on to that message for a really long time. And that's something really simple, but some people are going to hold on to that information in a different way to others. And some people are going to ruminate over it or create ideas or have it reinforced or take it home and have an adult talk to them about it or see a scene on TV. There's so many things in our environment can impact us. And I think that's why if people are thinking that sex isn't working for them or they're struggling with sex or there's something not right, that's why I always say the first thing to think about is what are the messages I've got about sex and do they still fit me? Because these blueprints might be out of date. How can I question them? Do I think these are doing me any good anymore? Or do I think that I might need to adapt my ideas about sex or update my ideas about sex? One of the things I talk about a lot is listening to multiple perspectives about sex. So listen to what different people, different experts, different, whatever it is, podcasts like this, TED Talks, books, listen to what other people are saying, because the version of sex that we've been taught is so tunnel vision. And that in itself can be very limiting. And as soon as we start kind of opening it up and exploring a bit more, we can realize that sex can work for us in so many different ways.
And if you've been in a relationship for a while, this kind of spicing things up or, getting the spark back, what do you have to say about that? Do people come to you with those kind of problems? They're like, oh, sex is kind of not really happening or it's getting boring or...
Yeah, people definitely present with those kind of issues, but typically it's because there then becomes a lack of wanting or interest or motivation to have sex because sex has become routine or it's no longer working. The phrase spice it up, I really can't bear. But I think that, as humans, we habituate, we learn, we get used to things. That's how we operate. When it comes to our sex lives, that's not necessarily a good thing. So research does show that actually people in longer term relationships who know their partners have really satisfying sex because there's a level of comfort and knowing each other and knowing each other's bodies and what each other like that can be really good for our sex lives. But when sex becomes very predictable, that can be a dampener for desire. We don't get as excited because we know how it's going to go. It doesn't build up so much anticipation. And so that's something that we can do something about. But again, it's about addressing it. And as a couple, if you're in a relationship, it might be something you want to talk about, like, let's try something new, let's do something a bit different, or let's set ourselves a challenge or make it into a game or whatever we want to do to create a bit of change. And it doesn't take a lot. I think some of those phrases like spicing it up sometimes can be terrifying for people because they think they've got to go and do all these crazy different wild things. And actually it could be something like creating a small shift in your sex life, like having sex at a different time of day, or starting with the lights on rather than them being turned off, or undressing each other rather than getting into bed without your clothes on, or a different room of the house. We don't have to jump to the extreme.
Yeah, because I was going to say, like, if you're shy, if you're a shy person, and especially as well if you struggle with body confidence, then that is just terrifying to think about. Oh, do I need to invest in a trapeze for the for the house, or
Yeah.
get out the 50 Shades of Grey books for inspiration?
No, it's about making it work for you, because if you feel more comfortable, you're going to feel more confident and you're going to enjoy yourself more. And Emily Nagoski, who wrote the amazing book Come As You Are, she has an amazing workbook called the Come As You Are workbook. I highly, highly recommend it to anyone. She talks about how pleasure is the measure. And it's just such a good phrase for anything like
Right.
this, because that's the bit we should be focusing on, is like, how does this feel good for me?
Well, speaking of which, I'm super curious to know what you think about breakup sex, so sex with a recent ex, and also friends with benefits, which I just air quoted for anybody listening on the pod. I think those should come with quite a strong warning in terms of, because sex isn't just physical, it's emotional and mental as well, right? Do we have to be mindful?
I think we definitely need to be mindful. Those arrangements tend to work whilst they're mutual, and as soon
Mm,
as they're not mutual is when people get into difficulties, and that's because one person is more in it than the other, or one person starts dating whilst still in one of those arrangements. And I think that when we've broken up with an ex, there typically tends to be a reason.
yeah.
And some people get back together with their exes and have really happy functioning relationships that time apart, that the changes that they've made really work for them. But I think, yeah, being mindful, because at some point, unless it continues the way it is, there will be a shift for one or both partners, and that's when it becomes tricky.
Through the lens of mental health, what are some of the more sort of common, widespread problems that people come to you seeking help on? There's a comfort in feeling like you're not the only one going through it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's one of the biggest, I think that's actually a real benefit of psychosexual therapy, is that you're talking to someone, or any kind, whether it's not just psychosexual therapy, having a conversation with anyone about this, is feeling like in some way you're not the only person in the world that feels this way. I would say that anxiety in some way, shape, or form plays a part in almost every person that I work with as an
Mm,
underlying issue. So whether that's not feeling good enough, whether it's about body confidence, whether it's about pleasure, whether it's about sexual functioning, whether it's about sexual pain. So I work with a lot of dysfunctions and pain conditions, people's worries about how they're going to be perceived with their partners, something mentioned earlier, anxieties around lack of experience. Um, so I think that
mm,
that plays a big part. In terms of more specifics, performance anxiety and sometimes related erectile dysfunction is something I work with a lot. Conditions like vaginismus, which is an involuntary contraction of the muscles around the vagina, which prevents penetration. So it can make
oh,
penetration
wow.
or attempted penetration very painful or uncomfortable, is really common. We think that that's as common as 1 in 500 women. And sexual
Wow.
pain conditions, but also people have physical conditions like endometriosis, which makes sex very painful.
Yeah.
And so there are physical conditions which are also impacting people's ability to have comfortable sex. And we see that
Mm,
also hormonal conditions or stages, life stages, for example, like postnatally, menopause can impact. And so there is just such a wide reach for what's
mm,
going on. Also, people that take antidepressants can struggle with sex. So we know that a common side effect of SSRIs is that people can report struggling to orgasm more, or feeling sexually aroused. And instead of thinking that's the end of your sex life, actually working out how you can recalibrate to manage that with the benefits that those medications might be offering you is a big part of it. And that again is Emily Nagoski, who I mentioned earlier. She came onto my podcast and we talked about stress and sex, and that was something that she brought up because she was told by her doctor that they would be almost the end to her sex life. And she said, how about we can do something with that instead?
Yeah. Well, speaking of your podcast, the Sexual Wellness Sessions podcast, I mean, today we've kind of really only scratched the surface. I definitely encourage anyone listening to, that wants to go deeper to check that out. You must see big transformations within the clients that you do see and have seen, right? From A to B.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's, I'm very privileged to do my job. I absolutely love it. And it's, psychosexual therapy is very intimate in lots of ways for lots of people. It's just talking therapy. But for many people, having the conversation that can't be had anywhere else, it can be a practice, a trial and a getting comfortable for being able to take those conversations out and have them outside the therapy room. But there's something very, I was going to say therapeutic, but that's obvious. But just in us being able to explore all of our stuff in a way that feels safe when sex doesn't feel like that necessarily in the rest of our conversations.
Yeah, it must be like a weight off. Kate, I ask every guest as we start to wrap things up to set us some homework based on the theme of the episode. So in this case, what is a simple, actionable thing that we can do when it comes to our sex life and our mental and emotional health that will help us on our quest to building a happier life?
Think about how you define sex and therefore how that's impacting your sex life. Because I think it's something that we can all question. And when we have this idea in our heads, which is sex equals this, and that shapes our sex lives, and we feel like our sex life isn't working for us, we have the ability to reshape it or redefine it or make it work for us. But I don't think that that's something that we're told. And I think it's a really good way of starting to reshape things. And I think following on from that, then, like I said earlier, listening to what different people have to say, not a plug for my podcast, but I've interviewed some amazing experts and I've learned so much from the conversations with all of them. And they're all on specific topics, whether it be stress, erectile dysfunction, desire, grief, we did an episode on. But listening to those different voices will start to help you to shape a less sex negative view, but also this understanding of how flexible and fluid it can be. And I think that it's not what we're taught. We're taught this is sex, sex education particularly. This is sex. This is what you do with it. This is how you do it. Off you go.
Yeah.
And that's a very small and narrow definition. And actually we have the ability to make that so much better.
Yeah. Do people come when they first come to you? Are they a little bit intimidated? Are they a bit shy, or are they quite open? Because I imagine as well, there's still a big chunk of people that would love to go to somebody like yourself, but they feel too embarrassed or ashamed. What do you say to those people, actually?
I say I would be more surprised if someone came to a first session of psychosexual therapy really relaxed and happy to be there, because the goal of coming is to achieve the changes in your sex life that you want. And a huge part of that is to do with the culture that we have around sex. And so it's so normal to come in with no, I never underestimate how much it takes someone to send the inquiry email to come for a first session. It's a really big step and that asking for help. But I know the most wonderful network of psychosexual therapists, all who have really booked practices and waiting lists. And the reason that is because there's such a need for it. And there are amazing apps now which are offering so much advice, which is obviously not personalized in the same way, but has great educational content for people that I think can be really helpful. So apps like Furly, we've got Blueheart, and there's Mojo, which is specifically for men struggling with psychological erectile dysfunction. And we can get access to a lot of really good quality information. Therapy isn't for everyone and isn't accessible for everyone. And I think that it's important. That's why I made the podcast. Is important that we don't feel limited by that, but know that there are other routes to being able to get something that might help us enough.
Yeah, definitely worth exploring more for sure. To find out more on you, it's katemoyle.co.uk, and at Kate Moyle Therapy on Instagram is a great resource too.
Yes, and the podcast is the Sexual Wellness Sessions, as we said. I'm always happy to offer recommendations. In the UK, if you're looking for a psychosexual therapist, the College of Sexual and Relationship Therapists has a directory, but there are, amazing experts, amazing books, amazing content. Like, if you feel like you want to explore some of this stuff, there are so many ways you can do it, and I really want to leave people with that as an idea.
Thank you, Kate. So interesting.
Oh, I'm so pleased. Well, thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you for doing what you do. That's a wrap.
Okay, fab.
Oh, thanks again to Kate Moyle. She's great, isn't she? And a big thank you to you for making it through another episode of the Happier Life Project with me, Gabby Sanderson. If you are suffering with your mental health, there is a crisis button on the My Possible Self app, which will signpost you to the correct information for immediate expert advice. Those of you who are listening not on the app, but on one of the podcast platforms, the My Possible Self app is completely free to download. We've got so much great content on there, and you don't need to worry about it costing you anything. Make sure you subscribe and leave a review if you found this episode helpful. And to find and follow us on social media, we are at My Possible Self, and I've been at Radio Gabby. So please do take care, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.